In the vast lands of the north, where winter never lets up and hunger is a constant spectre, a small village suffers under the weight of a cruel and relentless Jarl. Sigvald, the lord of these frozen lands, imposes severe taxes on his people, as if suffering were a fair payment for simple survival. But in the midst of this darkness, an ordinary man emerges. His name is Ivar, and his spirit does not allow itself to be bent by the currents of fate. Instead of bowing before Sigvald's tyranny, he decides to fight for the freedom of his people, betting everything on a bold and unpredictable incursion to distant Ireland. Ivar's plan is risky, almost insane. Gather warriors of unshakable courage, cross rough seas and return with riches capable of restoring his village to its lost dignity. But, as always happens in stories that defy the empire of fear, one man's success is a seed of envy in others. Sigvald, who already saw himself as an unbeatable god in his ice fortress, sees in Ivar a threat to his plans. Upon his victorious return, Ivar finds no applause, but the weight of betrayal in the shadows of an unfair trial. Exiled, homeless and with his warrior spirit intact, he takes refuge in the frozen forest, where a new chapter is unfolding. The fight for freedom is just beginning, and Ivar, now reborn, will do everything to overthrow the tyrant and bring justice to his land. But what happens when the fury of revenge meets the flame of loyalty? What is revealed when the courage of an ordinary man becomes a symbol of revolution? The fate of the village and all who live in it is about to be decided. The echo of battle will be heard by all, and in the heart of the great hall, where swords meet steel, two men, one of honor, the other of treason, will face each other in a fight for the future of their land. In the north of the known world, where winter seems eternal and the mountains touch the sky, there is a village that, although small in number, carries an immense weight on its shoulders. The icy winds that blow from the mountains are known to all, as if they had been sculpted by ancient and merciless gods, those who put men to the test. This village, located in the heart of an isolated and arid land, is not just a community of survivors, but a reflection of the wounds of a people struggling against an implacable destiny. Under the rule of Sigvald the Jarl, the village walks on the brink of desolation, its lands marked by the iron hand of the leader who reigns with cruelty and distrust. Sigvald is not a man who can simply be classified as a villain or a hero. He is a leader tempered by circumstances, by a difficult life that has demanded of him an almost supernatural toughness. His rise to power was achieved not only by strength of arms, but by a cunning mind, capable of predicting the movements of his enemies and eliminating those who dared to question his authority. However, this skill, this cunning that made him great in his own eyes, turned into a cold and ruthless tyranny. His vision of leadership was simple: rule by force, by imposing fear, by subordinating everyone around him. He believed that the survival of his village depended on his heavy hand, and the people, fearing famine and the storms that ravaged their lands, bowed to his decrees. Life in the village under Sigvald was a constant exercise in resistance. The climate, hostile by nature, forced everyone to live in an extremely austere way. The very long winter, where the ice seemed to infiltrate people's souls, was a cruel season, which required not only physical strength, but a unique mental resilience. The houses were small and built of rough timber, reinforced with layers of moss and hay to withstand the biting cold. Fires were lit in every corner of the village, but they did little to warm the souls of the men who were forced to pay high taxes, which seemed to never diminish, but only increase with each passing year. Sigvald had no mercy. He believed that pain was the only way to strengthen the spirit of men. Therefore, he imposed heavy taxes, demanding part of the harvest and what little the village could produce. Fishing, when possible, fed some of the inhabitants, But the frequent storms and treacherous seas made every catch a miracle. When hunting was necessary, the men braved the dark and icy forests, where game had become increasingly scarce. Thus, Sigvald's people, already accustomed to suffering and scarcity, struggled for some relief. They lived a hard routine of hard work and little reward, where hope was a barely extinguished flame, and rebellion seemed a distant concept. The fear of defying the Jarl ran like poison through the frozen streets, and the idea of revolt was more a legend than a possible reality. However, despite the oppression and the atmosphere of despair, the spirit of survival still pulsed in the veins of many. With each new winter, with each new cycle of hunger and pain, there emerged those who, like Ivar, believed that life could be different. Ivar, although considered an ordinary man, represented the spark of silent resistance that blossomed in the hearts of the bravest. He was one of the few who did not accept the order established by Sigvald, even if his courage was still hidden in the shadows of what the people called normality. When Sigvald's words began to sound more like empty promises and revered orders, Ivar felt that something needed to change. His gaze, which had previously been that of a man who had simply accepted suffering, now carried the flame of hope. Something was coming, and he knew that everyone's destiny was about to change. Life in the village was also marked by a rigid hierarchy. Sigvald, as Jarl, did not share his power with anyone. Around him, only his most loyal followers occupied prominent positions, men who had been forged alongside him in battles and in times of need. These men were feared, for they were the executive arms of his government, those who punished transgressors and ensured that the Jarl's rules were strictly enforced. However, the majority of the population was made up of peasants and fishermen, simple people who spent their days trying to survive the harsh reality that the land offered. Women, children, and the elderly found themselves on the margins of an existence limited by the scarcity of resources and constant hunger, but even so, the resistance of many did not disappear. Farming was difficult in the countryside, with a cold soil and short growing seasons. Harvests were scarce and often ruined by relentless storms. Even so, the people found ways to survive, planting what they could, raising what they could. But there was never enough food, and each year, Sigvald's toll seemed to increase. The Jarl demanded more than the people could give, and the village was always on the brink of destitution. The strongest men were forced to go out into the icy waters to fish, and the women largely cared for the children and kept the houses warm, while the wounds of battle and the hardships of life covered the faces and bodies of the people. Yet, despite all the hardships, there was something special about the land, something that no leader, no matter how powerful, could extinguish. The flame of hope that burned, often silent but always present. Around every corner, in every exchange of glances, the eyes of the people sought something more, something beyond the pain. And it was in this scenario, under the reign of Sigvald, that an ordinary man, Ivar, would decide to break the chains of destiny and search for something beyond the walls of ice that surrounded his life and his village. Ivar was born not as a leader, but as the son of peasants. His origins were not marked by nobility, but by the strength of a simple and resilient people. The village, isolated between mountains and forests, was not a place for the weak, and from an early age Ivar learned that life there was a constant battle against the elements, against hunger and against oppression. His parents were humble workers, men of courage who knew that in order to survive they had to be stronger than the earth and the relentless winds. But Ivar had something else, something that his parents had failed to instill in him, an inner flame that could not be extinguished, a thirst for something beyond misery. He was the eldest son, and this gave him greater responsibility from the beginning. As a child, when his friends played hunting with their parents or fishing in the icy waters, Ivar stood out not for his natural ability, but for his unwavering determination. While many succumbed to exhaustion or fear of the vast, dark forest, Ivar never gave up. He hunted as if it were the last hunt of his life, and fished with a precision that impressed even the most seasoned. Little by little, his name became known not only in the village, but in the surrounding lands. Ivar became a symbol of strength and perseverance, a young man capable of facing the greatest challenges with the courage of a veteran, despite his youth. Over time, Ivar's fame spread throughout the clan. Although his humble origins kept him far from the chambers of the nobles, he earned respect on the battlefield, where his prowess with the sword and skill with the spear were tested time and time again. He was not the tallest, nor the strongest physically, but he possessed something that few warriors could match: a sharp mind, an instinct for survival, and a willingness to fight for what he believed was right. With each battle, with each confrontation with the beasts of the forest, Ivar became more than just a warrior. He became a living legend. But this fame also came at a price. In the heart of Sigvald the Jarl, a silent envy grew. Ivar was becoming a symbol of resistance, a force that could eventually challenge Sigvald's own authority. Then, on a cold, biting night, the opportunity to change the fate of the village arrived, but not without cost. Jarl Sigvald summoned Ivar to a secret meeting, a conversation that would be more of a test than a simple negotiation. The room where they met was lit only by torches, their flames dancing as if they were about to go out at any moment. The Jarl, seated in his fur chair, looked at Ivar with a calculating gaze, as if weighing the weight of his words. "Ivar," Sigvald said in a deep, emotionless voice, "I have heard of your exploits. You have become an important figure, more than just a man of the village, more than a warrior." He paused, as if measuring each word that followed. "I am willing to send a group of warriors to Ireland. The sea winds can bring us riches, and this gold can ensure our survival for a long time. You, Ivar, will be the commander of this expedition." Ivar was silent for a moment, absorbing the Jarl's words. He knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a step toward what he so desired, a chance to change the fortunes of his people. However, he did not let his excitement get the better of him. He knew that behind the generous offer there was a price to be paid. Sigvald continued, with a barely perceptible smile. "The raid will be risky. The seas are treacherous, and the lands of Ireland are unknown. But you will have the chance to prove your worth. However, there is one condition, Ivar. When you return with the riches, bring them all. Bring everything you can, but pay the price. 80% of the tribute will be given to me. The rest will remain with you and your men. That is what I demand." Ivar felt the weight of the Jarl's words like a blow. He knew that Sigvald did not act selflessly, that the Jarl saw absolute control over the lives of others, even in the most daring actions. However, the offer was tempting. The chance to secure the village's future and bring wealth to all, even if it cost his people their freedom in a moment, was something Ivar knew he could not ignore. He would need this wealth to become a real leader, someone who could challenge Sigvald and change the fate of the village forever. "I will," Ivar replied, his voice firm and full of conviction. "I will, Jarl Sigvald. But remember one thing, my people will no longer be oppressed. One day, this debt will be paid, and the price will be high." Sigvald looked at him with an expression that was hard to read. Perhaps it was a look of approval, or perhaps of a leader who was beginning to see Ivar not just as a warrior, but as a potential threat. "Be careful, Ivar," he said, his voice thick with warning. "The adventure to Ireland will be difficult. It will not be easy, but if you succeed, you will have what you seek and more. If you fail, Well, the price will be higher than you can imagine." With those words, the meeting came to a close. Ivar knew the mission would not be easy. Ireland was far away, sea travel was notoriously harsh, and the risks were immense. But the promise of riches and the chance to change the fate of the village kept him going. He left the room, his heart pounding, his spirit sharp as a blade. Now, the real journey began. As he left, Ivar immediately gathered his most loyal men. They knew that this mission would not be just an expedition for gold, but the first step towards challenging Sigvald's rule and ushering in a new era for their village. With the icy winds blowing against them, preparations began. Barrels of water, sharp weapons, provisions for the long journey. Everything was carefully arranged, for the force of the seas and the fury of the winds would be only the beginning of the challenges that awaited. Ivar and his men were ready to face anything, for honor, for their village, and above all, for freedom. The journey to Ireland, with the icy winds blowing against their faces and the rough sea challenging their every move, was more difficult than Ivar and his men could have imagined. When they set sail from the icy coast, Sigvald's village seemed as distant as the gods themselves. The ship, a skeletal and imposing draka, cut through the turbulent waters with impressive agility, but the men knew that the real test lay ahead. The fury of the ocean, immense and merciless, seemed to test the limits of human courage with each rising wave, like an ancient monster eager to swallow everything in its path. For the first few days, the sea seemed calm, but soon things began to change. The wind, which had once been favorable, turned against them, and the sails that had once filled with invigorating strength now sagged, as if the air itself had refused to help them. Storms began to appear without warning, with lightning lighting up the sky and deafening thunder that made the very hull of the ship creak under the pressure of the waves. The group remained together, their callous hands adjusting the ropes and sails, their minds focused on the mission despite the immense fury of the sea. Each night, when the wind howled and the waters seemed to close in on them, Ivar watched his men with a watchful eye, keeping hope alive like a flame that refused to go out. But it was not only the fury of nature that threatened the journey. Food shortages and the relentless cold soon began to take their toll. The once plentiful fish became scarce, and for days the group was forced to ration their meager resources. Tensions among the men began to grow, some questioning the wisdom of continuing the mission. But Ivar stood firm, his words cutting through the wind like a sharp edge. The land of Ireland awaits us, and with it, the chance for our redemption. We cannot fail. Our people need us. His words ignited a spark of determination in his companions, who, despite all their fatigue and fear, pressed on, ever toward the unknown. It was after weeks of torment that the horizon finally opened before them. The land of Ireland, with its imposing cliffs and green coastline, appeared like an almost supernatural vision. The dark clouds began to dissipate, and the sea finally calmed, as if recognizing the courage of those who had defied its fury. Ivar's group landed in a secluded bay, hidden by rocks and dense vegetation, a perfect place to avoid detection. The monastery of Clonmacnoise, where they knew great riches were stored, was only a short walk away, and Ivar knew that this was the opportunity for which they had risked everything. The Irish town, with its green fields and secluded villages, seemed peaceful at first glance, but Ivar and his men knew that the monastery was a valuable target. The building was imposing, its stone walls tall and sturdy, with towers that reached toward the sky as if daring the sun itself to touch them. The monastery, with its precious relics and ancient scrolls, was protected not only by local warriors, but also by monks who had become skilled in defending their sacred possessions. But Ivar was not here to negotiate or ask permission. He had come with one goal in mind: wealth. and the only language he knew was force. The battle that followed was fierce and relentless. Ivar and his men attacked with precision, surrounding the monastery and cutting off any escape. Swords sliced through the air, shields clashed with brutal force, and the sound of spears piercing flesh was deafening. The Irish warriors, surprised by the speed and ferocity of the attack, tried to resist, but they soon realized that they were outmatched. Ivar's men were experienced, and the brutality of the attack caused them to retreat quickly. Even the monks, in their sacred robes, tried to fight, but their lack of preparation did not prevent them from succumbing to the Viking might. In the heat of battle, Ivar stood out, his blade cutting with deadly precision, his presence on the battlefield inspiring his men to fight with unquenchable fervor. After hours of fighting, the monastery was taken. Ivar and his men found riches beyond imagination, chests of gold, silver, and jewels, as well as books and scrolls that dated back to time immemorial. They looted everything they could carry, knowing that each piece of gold would ensure not only their survival, but also the future of their village. Among the treasures, Ivar found an ancient sword, forged of black iron, with runes engraved on its hilt. He knew it was a symbol of the very strength he sought, the power to change the fate of his people, to overthrow Sigvald and bring justice to his land. The journey back was marked by a sense of triumph, but also of caution. The sea, once a fierce enemy, now seemed more like an ally, the gentle waves guiding the ship home. Ivar and his men, though exhausted and wounded, carried in their hearts a renewed confidence. They had achieved something immense, something that could finally break the chains of oppression that bound them to Sigvald's will. When the ship finally came into sight of the shore of his village, Ivar felt the weight of his journey. The sound of the waves crashing against the rocks seemed to celebrate the arrival of a hero, and he knew that his mission was far from complete. But this return was not just physical. It was a promise fulfilled. As they disembarked, the villagers gathered to watch them return, their eyes shining with hope and admiration. The gold, jewels, and scrolls were a dazzling sight. But what really mattered was the fighting spirit and courage that Ivar and his men had brought back. Ivar, with his ancestral sword in hand, walked up to the village square, where the people were waiting for him. His eyes met Sigvald's, who, upon seeing Ivar's wealth and renown, could not hide the anger that was rising within him. But Ivar knew that now, with the strength of gold and the courage of his people, he was closer than ever to defying the tyrant and winning the freedom they so desperately sought. Ivar's return was not just a victory in battle, but the rebirth of a people. In every smile, in every gesture of gratitude, he saw the reflection of their struggle, a struggle that would not end while Sigvald still held power. But now, he knew that the coming war would be fought not just with swords, but with the power of a united people, and he was more than ready for the next stage of this epic journey. When Ivar and his men finally returned to their village, what they had expected to be a triumphant welcome turned into a cruel surprise. The sound of the waves crashing against the rocks and the familiar scent of the north wind could not hide the foreboding that something was wrong. Ivar sensed it immediately, the weight of tension in the air, the way the villagers' expressions seemed more hesitant than wistful. Something was not right. The sound of the bells, which normally heralded a triumphant arrival, now sounded like a grim warning. When the party landed on the shore, Sigvald's men were there, waiting for them. It was not a warm greeting, but an imposing line of warriors, armed to the teeth. Ivar frowned, feeling a chill run through his skin. He knew the Jarl had something on his mind, something he was not willing to share openly. In the distance, Sigvald watched, sitting in his seat of power, his eyes cold and calculating, like a wolf waiting for a wrong move. "Ivar!" Sigvald shouted, his voice filled with quiet but devastating venom. "You have forgotten who rules this land. Your incursion into Ireland was done without my permission. I cannot allow this to continue. Your treachery will not be tolerated." The shock hit Ivar like a punch to the gut. He knew this accusation was a lie, that the Jarl was only trying to erase the threat Ivar posed. Sigvald had always feared his growing popularity and the power of his name. The conquest of Ireland, and the riches and honor Ivar had brought back, were an affront to Sigvald's ego, and he could not allow it to continue. Ivar's false crime was a perfect pretext to neutralize him, and the Jarl did not hesitate to take decisive action. Ivar's men, exhausted from their journey in the battle in Ireland, did not stand by in the face of this affront. Some shouted angrily, calling for Ivar to be defended. "Sigvald is a liar," shouted one of his closest men, his face etched with rage. "Ivar committed no crime. He brought riches to us all." But the strength of Sigvald's troops soon made itself felt. The Jarl's tyranny was well established, and his soldiers were more numerous and better trained. Ivar, even with his heart torn by betrayal, saw the imminent fight taking shape. However, as he looked at his men, tired and wounded from the long journey, a difficult decision took hold of his spirit. He knew that the battle would not only be physical, but also psychological. If they fought back, their fate would be sealed. "No!" Ivar shouted, his voice deep and firm. "We must not fight back, my brothers. Not here. Not now." Decided to avoid bloodshed, Ivar bowed to Sigvald's decree. He knew that by accepting exile, he would save the lives of his men and at the same time take a step closer to destroying Sigvald's tyranny in a more definitive way. He walked away, his eyes burning with fury, as his men were forced to follow. But before he could walk away completely, Ivar sent a secret message to his most loyal companion, Rollo, a man whose heart and courage were unmatched. The message was clear. Sigvald's tyranny must come to an end. The blood he has shed for so long will be avenged. Prepare yourself, my friend. War is coming. Weeks of exile passed. Ivar was forced to live far from his homeland, hidden in the icy forests, where the biting wind and solitude were his only companions. But rather than give in to grief and unbridled revenge, Ivar used the time to regroup. He knew he could not face Sigvald alone. The Jarl had control of the troops and the fortresses, but Ivar had something else. The loyalty of men like Rollo and others who were dissatisfied with the tyrannical rules Sigvald imposed. Ivar was not alone in the forest. He began to gather loyal warriors, men willing to challenge Sigvald's authority, to fight for a better future. The days of planning were marked by secret meetings, where they discussed every step, every move. Meanwhile, the village was far away, but Ivar knew that Sigvald's time was running out. The people, who had previously lived in fear of the Jarl, began to murmur about Ivar's arrival and his new strength. Rumors that the hero was gathering a secret army began to spread, and this, more than anything else, made Sigvald's heart beat faster. Anger and fear began to eat away at the Jarl. He knew that Ivar's threat could no longer be ignored. When Ivar finally gathered enough men, he prepared for his return. He had prepared in secret, gathering provisions, weapons, and allies. The time for revolt had come. Ivar's return to the village was imposing. He and his men marched to the center of the town, where Sigvald awaited him. The Jarl, in all his rage, was determined to end the threat that Ivar posed once and for all. He knew that his superiority was guaranteed by brute force, but he could no longer ignore the fact that Ivar was no longer just an ordinary man. He had become something more, a symbol of resistance, a man the village had been waiting for. The battle was brutal and bloody. Ivar, armed with his forged sword and with the power of his people at his side, advanced against Sigvald with unparalleled ferocity. Sigvald, with his heavy sword, struck hard, trying to crush Ivar once and for all. But Ivar, with agility and precision, struck blows that cut through the Jarl's defenses, making him falter. The battle between the two unfolded like a deadly dance, with the sound of swords clashing and the echo of the fight filling the air. Finally, with one precise blow, Ivar managed to bring Sigvald down. The Jarl, exhausted and wounded, tried to get up, but his defeat was evident. Ivar, his eyes burning with vengeance, shouted to his men, "Sigvald is no longer our leader. He is just a man, and now he will fall as all tyrants fall. Finish off his supporters." At Ivar's order, his warriors attacked Sigvald's loyal men, and the village was swept up in a wave of vengeance and justice. Those who had supported the Jarl were mercilessly decimated, and Ivar's men took the seats of power. When the sun set on that bloody day, Ivar stood tall, Sigvald's sword in his hand, and the village on its knees at his feet. Now, Ivar the Bloodthirsty had become the new Jarl of the village. The men hailed him as a leader, and the people, once oppressed, now saw him as their only hope for a prosperous future. He had brought justice, and with it, a new reign had begun. The people, who had previously lived in fear and misery, now looked to Ivar with admiration and respect, knowing that under his rule, the village would finally know a bright future free from tyranny. Did you like this story? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next epic sagas. The journey continues.